strong opinions held loosely, like clear plans held loosely. I believe in having, say, a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, but also being very recognizing that the world happens and life happens and that you're going to be thrown off course. You might have had career plans 3 to 5 years ago, whatever you thought you were going to be doing with your career. And is that still the same with AI and everything that's happened in the last 12 months? There's some things you can't necessarily forecast, and you got to kind of have directionally where you think you want to go, the true north, but then be ready to pivot.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 212 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, Matt Loop. Few people have had as much influence in shaping the tech landscape in this region as Matt. He started his career at Salesforce, where he was one of the earliest employees in Australia, before going on to lead sales at LinkedIn, initially in Australia and New Zealand, before moving to the US to head up enterprise sales in North America. He then moved back to Australia to become the head of Asia Pacific at Slack, growing the company's presence in the region. And today, Matt is a VP and head of Asia at Rippling, a workforce management platform that transforms the way businesses manage their people, IT, and operations. Just last month, they announced their $450 million Series G funding round, taking their total valuation to $16.8 billion. In this episode, we covered a wide range of topics, including how to lead and manage high-performing teams, what Matt looks for when he's hiring for talent, the frameworks he uses to assess what the right opportunities are for him, how he balances a high-impact career with family life, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Matt Loop. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Wonderful to be here.
Likewise. So, Matt, for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Sure. Well, probably tell by the voice, American originally, and in 2004, I had the wonderful opportunity to move to Australia, sight unseen, and start my kind of beginnings as a sales leader working for US tech companies in this beautiful part of the world. So I came here with Salesforce and helped them set up their business in Asia Pacific, hubbed in Sydney, spent 9 years with them, pivoted over to LinkedIn, where I did the same for their Sales Navigator division and product, and spent 2 years doing that both here in Australia and Asia. Spent 4.5 years back in California working for LinkedIn, but my daughter was about to start kindergarten, verbal prenup or arrangement with my wife. We'd be back in Australia to raise our kids and have them go to school. So that time came coming and worked perfectly for a great opportunity with Slack to help build up the business that they had just started out of Melbourne about a year before I arrived. That went wonderfully. I got reacquired by the Big Blue Cloud, my original company that brought me here, Salesforce. And about 2 years ago, I transitioned to help open the fourth company, which is Rippling, which is a workplace management platform and payroll platform born out of San Francisco. In fact, all 4 of the companies I work for are like catty corner 1 block away from each other. And I've been doing that for 2 years and helping build the business again here locally in Australia and more broadly in Asia.
Yeah. I mean, obviously such a fascinating background that I want to sort of dig in deeper into, but someone that I spoke to as part of the research process to this for this interview was your wife, Katrina, who, aside from telling me that she learned that you had amazing singing abilities on your second date at the Christmas party when you were singing the Australian national anthem, she also mentioned that, you know, when you were sort of early in your career, I think you made it very clear that you were, although you were sort of still relatively junior at the time, that you were intentionally sort of looking for those leadership opportunities, particularly overseas. And at a stage where you kind of like, what she mentioned was like you kind of told the leader that, tell me exactly what it is that I need to do and how I need to sort of get there, and, you know, that you were sort of open to all of those opportunities. I guess that's a lot for someone that's kind of relatively young in their career to sort of put on their plate and be sort of that forward thinking with things. Was that always like a part of your kind of DNA? Like where did that come from for you?
Yeah, I think I've always been someone who looks ahead and like thinks about where they want to be. And maybe as younger days, I didn't write them down and be as thoughtful around it, but I always kind of knew was goal oriented and thought about how I could get to that place. it starts all the way going back to like where I wanted to go to college. I was very clear in my head. There were a couple schools that I wanted to get into and was very intentional about how I went about doing that. I thought I was going to be a sports agent, and I went about trying to get into an unbelievably competitive field. Ultimately ended up falling in my lap and serendipity came through. But I also am a big believer in you create your own luck. And that's through having a bit of a plan and direction on where you want to go, taking action. And then from that, I think things happen, whether it's manifested through those actions or not. And I think the same thing happened in terms of working internationally. I studied international business in school. I knew I wanted to do that. That was kind of first step along the journey, but life happens. My father passed away. I spent a lot of time and canceled my plans to move abroad where I could really tease out what I was learning in school. But when it came time to it, and when it came time to find a job and landed at Salesforce, one of the precursors was I wanted the opportunity to go and move internationally. I want to take what I had learned, what was always my vision, to move somewhere, be exposed and surrounded by different people, different culture, and put all that learning to use. That came to fruition with Salesforce. It was part of what I interviewed them on. I did my V2 Mom, which is the kind of framework that Benioff uses and the whole entire company uses to set your goals each year. And in week 2, I told my boss I wanted to move overseas and help them expand, and stayed on top of that, continued to probably be the persistent gnat in the ear of my manager. And then when that opportunity came up, it happened. I think much to the surprise and perhaps displeasure of a number of people that thought they should have gotten it ahead of me. I was the one who called it out, built a plan, worked through it with my manager, stayed on top of it, over-delivered on the commitments, and then ultimately ended up getting it. So again, I think that was probably the first time where I looked down the road on where I wanted to be. I kind of built back from that, the steps that I thought were going to be needed in order to get there, and then ultimately was able to do it. And I think I've continued to do that with each of these roles that I've stepped into over time.
Yeah. As someone who, as you said, is very sort of goal-oriented and sort of works backwards from a plan, I think a lot of the time those sort of plans work out, but there are also a lot of the times when things don't necessarily go to plan. And you kind of touched on, your initial goal to be a sports agent. And I think that a lot of people, especially at the start of their career, they can have a particular idea of what it is that they wanted to do. Very similarly, I also had dreams of being a sports agent at some point when my cricket career went by the wayside. But what does that sort of look like for you? What were some of the lessons from those sort of things when I guess you have a clear plan of what you're sort of going for and it doesn't quite work out? But as you said, sort of serendipitously, you kind of like fell into the right thing. Sort of, do you have any advice in terms of how to approach those types of situations?
Like strong opinions held loosely, like clear plans held loosely. I believe in having, say, a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, but also being very recognizing that the world happens and life happens and that you're going to be thrown off course. You might have had career plans 3 to 5 years ago, whatever you thought you were going to be doing with your career. And is that still the same with AI and everything that's happened in the last 12 months? That factors into how you work, that factors into perhaps wanting to go into that field. There's some things you can't necessarily forecast, and you got to kind of have directionally where you think you want to go, the true north, but then be ready to pivot.
Yeah. And you mentioned Salesforce. From what I understand, you were the first employee or one of the first few people?
One of the first few. There was 2 other gentlemen, Robert and Doug, who came over from the States a few months before me. They, I think, did everything from just setting up the original brand and office. At that time, there was another company called Salesforce here in Australia. It's now called Salmat. And so there was some naming battles back and forth on who would be called Salesforce and fighting for web domains. And then I came down to start the kind of SDR team and build out all of our inbound and outbound motion and like begin the demand gen engine and process here in the region.
And what does that look like? Obviously when you are a recognized brand like Salesforce or, a recognized brand, there's a very different sort of mechanics in terms of like building up that sales engine. What does that look like in trying to generate that from the start of like, how do you try and find your inroads into a company? What does the go-to-market sort of look like?
Well, we were not recognized back then. Like we were the wild disruptor to the incumbent Siebel, who, it was on-premise software ruled the roost. It was Oracle, SAP, Microsoft. Salesforce had this idea that why can't we have enterprise software over the internet like Amazon and eBay? We're providing consumer services over the internet. And that kind of began the process of building the cloud computing industry, which they're the forefather and grandfather of. When I landed here, we weren't well known. When I joined the company, we were 200 employees. I think that's kind of a misnomer with a lot of the places I've been. They are all recognizable brands, yet I joined when they were much smaller, 200-ish employees. It was pre-IPO when I joined. I think we pretty much IPO'd almost when I landed here, maybe a little after. But we had no brand awareness down here. There were a few customers, but it wasn't PLG. So we weren't walking into a world where thousands of Australian customers had already bought Salesforce in the way they had with Slack. Like when I joined here, there were thousands of customers who had just spun up a workspace and bought Slack themselves. So each kind of go-to-market setup has been wildly different. Back in the Salesforce days, we had just started doing outbound SDR. The whole outbound SDR idea and notion was only kind of coming to promise, I guess. And this is, definitely a talk track of my career. I was fortunate enough to have an incredible leader who I worked for early days in Salesforce and headquarters, a guy named Aaron Ross, who wrote the book Predictable Revenue, which is the gospel for pretty much all technology companies and setting up their SDR organization. So he was my boss. Me and a couple others helped build that original outbound motion. And that's what I brought here to Australia, or brought more broadly Asia, to try to set that up and build it out. So that was still cold calling, some tactics on how we could capture email addresses, bulk import all of that, get it into a CRM, use marketing automation to do it at scale. I wouldn't say it was at personalization at scale back then, but it was the best, I think, approach that companies could do. And it soon became the playbook that many ran. And, I got to be on the forefront of that and doing it for the first couple of years down here.
Yeah. And obviously, as you mentioned, you've kind of gone through this cycle multiple times now with multiple different companies, and the playbook looks a little bit different for each of those companies. But, I'm sure that there's a bunch of listeners here that are early stage startup founders that, in the same way that you're sort of launching something new into a new market without that sort of brand credibility. It's a very similar sort of position for a lot of these startups where they've got a product with a value prop, but no real sort of credibility or customer base or those sort of things behind them. And oftentimes it can feel overwhelming because there's so many different things that they can or should do. I know it's a broad question, but any sort of advice in terms of like, what are the things that founders should focus on at those early stages?
A couple of things, and I think I kind of look through all the tactics that I've done over time and some of the ones that we've done most recently with Rippling, because yes, we have a brand and some credibility overseas in the US, but like you'd be surprised. We haven't done much brand marketing and there was very little awareness here. Number one, you can do things like PR, which is kind of broad awareness through, a variety of different mechanisms and way you go about doing that. Second, partnerships, like who are or ELG, ecosystem-led growth, community-led growth. And, we've tried to lean into that big time at Rippling. I think that is, at the forefront these days of something that's very important. I think people talk to the folks in their cohorts or in their communities that they're part of. In our universe, maybe that's a recruitment Slack group or gathering. Maybe it's a CPO group, maybe it's a CFO group, but how can we begin to build relationships in those communities amongst the key influencers in those communities? So I think that would be an obvious one. What really you have to do probably first and foremost, though, in Australia is customers, is like find 5 to 10 ICP clients, overinvest to make sure that they're wildly successful, take on board all of the feedback, good and bad, on what that experience is like for them. Price it however you have to in order to get them on board and make them wildly successful. That's going to give you clarity on what it is that's going to work in this market, what you have to do in order to serve, support, win, keep those types of customers, they'll become your advocates. And there's nothing, I think, more important than local stories from organizations that look and feel like me, that have an Australian address, not what you've done overseas, but what you've done locally here.
Yeah, super helpful. Just going back to that sort of example of picking those sort of 10 ICP customers, I think almost picking the right 10 customers is also as important. And it's not just about the logos, but it's about, the ways that the interaction, the value prop that you kind of got, how they're going to integrate with your product. Like I've seen a lot of early stage startups go wildly off course trying to build products for one particular company that doesn't sort of apply to everyone else. Again, any advice in terms of how to find those right 10 customers? Like who are the ways that you should sort of filter that out, or the way that you should sort of discover some of those sort of things through early sales calls with these companies?
Being kind of candid and transparent on what the experience is going to be. Like that there's quid pro quo. They're going to get a solution that you believe helps resolve a challenge that they've called out, but you've identified that there's real pain that your offering can perhaps solve it, and you're convinced that it can, that the experience is going to perhaps have some bumps in the road, and that we are asking and you're signing up to provide us feedback, and you kind of build a program around that that's clear on both sides, like what the responsibilities are. You might be getting the platform for free for 6 months. We believe it's going to provide you value and help address your issue, but we need that feedback. And, it's a two-way street and relationship. So I think that is probably the best way I would go about doing it. Finding people that are going to be a true partner in that, not just kind of consumers that go off and use the product.
Yeah. And I know that you were at Salesforce for about 9 years.
That's right. Yep.
What was the catalyst for you to leave and move on to the opportunity with LinkedIn?
Good question. Well, I was, I had 10 years at any place is a long time, and it was incredible innings. I was so blessed to work with, it's like the Hall of Fame of SaaS executives. My boss for 4 years is a guy named Aaron Katz, who's the CEO of ClickHouse, who just raised at, $6.5 billion. But him and others, I had the ridiculously fortunate opportunity to work underneath them. And that is something that I've been blessed by. I get to, in some ways, choose my boss at where I've gone. And it's been a big part of my decision making. In other places, been very fortunate to have great leaders. But it had come time. Like it had just kind of, to me, gotten stale. I was getting comfortable, arguably too comfortable. And, there was just a day where it all kind of became painfully obvious. There was some event and a disagreement that I had around something very trivial, but it was enough for me to say, like, I got to get out of here. And the next day, I got an in-mail from a guy named Mike Derizan, who started the whole Sales Navigator business at LinkedIn. And we had a number of people in common, both had gone to Berkeley together. And he said, hey, I'm looking to open this business in Asia. I would love to pick your brain and understand kind of go-to-market motion. And I said, let's get on the phone tomorrow. I'm one of the first million members of LinkedIn. So I just always believed, even when LinkedIn wasn't LinkedIn, that there was something to, the power of leveraging relationships and network, paying it forward. But also, like, can a warm introduction get you in the door when you're trying to approach a company? Can I talk to a friend who happens to work there and get a bit more insight than what we're getting through the, call it, traditional qualification process? Mike and I, an hour turned into like 2-hour interview. I think a week later, it was all buttoned up and I was making the move to LinkedIn.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you moved to North America. So I believe that you were looking after Australia or sort of Asia for a while, and then you had the opportunity to move to North America. And Katrina also mentioned this as well about like that being a difficult decision for you guys and having an agreement that it would be for a couple of years. And I think you were there for 5 years in the end.
Yeah, look, ultimately, I think she might have struggled more than me to leave. She made incredible friendships, and both of us personally, for our family, and then for me professionally, it was an incredible move, and we loved our time there. But I had told her that, one, I am American. I've lived here. I'm fine for it to be our forever home. I love living here. But the epicenter of the industry that I'm in is back there. I work for incredible companies where, leadership is largely centralized right there in the Bay Area. And I've also given up seeing my friends and family for north of a decade. I would love to go back there, have a tour of duty. I didn't use those words with her, but like have a stint back there. Like you get to see where I'm from. You get to get closer to all the people I have loved for 25 plus years, the first 25, 30 years of my life. And I get, I think, a professional experience that sets me up to do whatever I want long term here. Like if I can go run a big US part of the business at a behemoth like LinkedIn, I think it sets me up to be, a CRO or CEO of a company down in Australia longer term. So we made that move, loved it, snuck back just in time before COVID. So we got to spend it in the northern beaches of Sydney rather than constrained in California.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. And again, what was that sort of catalyst to join Slack specifically?
I'm always looking for disruptors. Salesforce was, enterprise software over the internet. LinkedIn, as a user, I knew it was disruptive into the way I sold myself, and I was teaching my reps to use it in their sales process. And so building the supercharged sales version, like I had been waiting for that to happen. And so it was just a no-brainer for me to make that jump, and absolutely loved my time there. Despite being part of Microsoft, despite having our biggest competitor at Slack, Teams, LinkedIn was a hugely email-centric organization. I don't know, 200 emails a day. And I just hated email. I just thought it was draining of my entire day. Like you just got caught up and you're like, did I just waste 6 hours in my inbox? Wildly unproductive. And so I just believed there had to be a better way. And Slack had been around for a while, hadn't really embraced salespeople at that point yet. Stuart, our CEO, had famously talked about, perhaps not needing salespeople. But when I looked into it and understood and started to use it, it was just, to me, so much better as a way to organize information, for me to be able to go pull what I needed and find everything that's there rather than siloed off the way it was in email. And so that was it. My boss is a former colleague of mine at Salesforce, Bob Friday. I walked down the road from LinkedIn to Slack, which is literally the other end of the street, and met with him and said, I'm moving back to Asia. Is there an opportunity to go fuel and lead the efforts to expand in Asia? And sure enough, there was, and that was it. So I saw them really, they were on an incredible growth story. They were, a PLG godsend, and really, I think, sparked that movement and, accomplish incredible things as an organization, but like disruptive to something that I personally had pain with and didn't like the use of email. So can I go to a place and bring that change to others and maybe brighten their workday and reduce their email inbox inload?
Love that. I actually had Cal Henderson, the co-founder and CTO of Slack, on the podcast a few years ago. I heard he's got this thing about wearing cargo shorts.
He wears shorts everywhere.
Shorts everywhere. Yeah.
He's incredible.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular? I think that working at these particular companies, every company has their own set of DNA and frameworks and those sort of things. Are there any particular things that you've taken from your experiences at Salesforce, LinkedIn, and Slack that you sort of think about or do apply at Rippling?
Yes, across the board to all of them. I think everything, I've taken the best, I think, of all of them. And, depending on the role I'm in, I use the applicable parts. Salesforce, incredible around, alignment, and from the top of the organization, setting a clear vision, and all of the, V2 MOM stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, measurements on how you're going to run the business at the mark level, at the next level down, all the way down to the individual contributor level. And I think that just keeps everyone on the same page. It's clarity and purpose of what your job is and how you fit into the broader purpose. And so doing some kind of goal setting exercise using that framework or others, I think is hugely helpful. LinkedIn, God, I took so many in and around culture and just leadership style. So a few that I'll share that I absolutely still use to date. Number one, the importance of celebrating values and hiring to values, the things that you truly believe make your DNA and business unique. So that definitely starts in the interview process, and you get great people on that align to the way you work, how you get work done, how you work together, and then celebrating those and the people who best exhibit those, on a regular basis. And, there was no one better than Mike Gamson, who ran LinkedIn. I can just remember every year at sales kickoff walking out of the main auditorium in awe. He had been there for like an hour and a half with kind of the 10 key values and telling like a 5-minute in-depth story of the person in the 4,000 person global org who just nailed it. And, the detail, the care, the thoughtfulness that he put into all of that exercise to go and truly understand it. And then seeing these people that were just incredible superstars and how they showed up and what they did. It just, that whole element around culture and that piece, culture can be so many things, but I always love that stuck in my head. Second is, managing through change. And there's a few ex-LinkedIners where we, had a very specific framework on how to lead through change. And it, tries to boil it down into really basic, easy to understand language. It's like, if you are an active detractor, you are a 1. If you are a active supporter, you're gung-ho for this change that we're bringing, you are a 5. And how can you just say, where are you on this kind of support continuum? Are you 0? Are you a 5? Break it down so that you can understand where employees are. Change takes time in some people. Some people can jump on and be ready to go straight away, but it's just I think, basic, easy language to understand where they are on their change journey, and then how I can perhaps support them and get them all the way through that. That was one. And then, the last was actually, came from another one of my leaders who, maybe there's 2 actually that are interesting from here. One is, a leader who himself said the thing that I often do is jump to have initial reactions, and I hear a situation and I haven't thought everything through. And like, it's this concept of seek to understand whatever might be presented to you in a given day. And there's tons of challenges and problems that come up every day. That's what we are. We're professional problem solvers. But when that comes to you, don't like jump with your initial gut reaction. Take the time and seek to understand all sides of the story. That has definitely saved me multiple times, where what's presented on paper looks really bad. And then when you dig in behind it and understand all the elements and characters are involved, there's much more to the situation, and you handle it differently rather than perhaps jumping to an adverse reaction. And then probably the last, and another just wildly influential leader on me, and what I would say is the best leadership team I've been a part of, was the last couple of years at LinkedIn, where we had, for the first time in my career, I had kind of direct line reporting into a female leader, Alyssa Merwin. And we kind of started off our time under her watch by going away on a bit of a retreat for a couple of days. And this was right around the time where Radical Candor had come out, and kind of leading with vulnerability, and vulnerability being a strength. So it was like pretty confronting, having the conversations and all of us just really opening up and telling our life stories to one another, and kind of just saying, if we're going to do great work together, we have to have this kind of communication, like fully open, fully transparent. And I'll tell you what, it was like a definitely a pinnacle moment in my leadership career. It was an incredible 3 days that we spent together. We all still stay in contact. I think all of us would probably agree that that moment in time, like, definitely stood out in our kind of coaching careers to date. And I think that's a big part of how I try to lead now is, be my authentic self, be as transparent and overly communicative as I can. Yeah, and bring my authentic self to work. So that was it was a fun couple of days in the Hamptons that we had.
Love that. I think one thing that's kind of evident from what you were just saying is the impact that leaders that you've had have had a impact on both your career and sort of how you sort of look at particular things. Two other people that I spoke to as part of the research process of this interview was James Demetriou and Andrew McCarthy, who both worked with you previously. James is working with you now at Rippling, and Andrew's GM at Notion. And I think they both kind of shared stories with me about where you were there dressing up in a Super Mario costume at 2 a.m. to congratulate one of them on a deal that they closed, and also just difficult time and being, one of the first people that sort of call up and just make sure that they sort of check in and make sure that they're okay with things. What does that sort of leadership and that culture look like for you? So obviously there's a culture that kind of happens across the company, but for your specific team that you sort of pull together, how do you think about that culture or kind of cultivating that group of sort of high performance, but also balancing that with care and vulnerability and all of those sort of things? Because sometimes people find that juggle really difficult. How do you sort of think about and sort of implement that for your own teams?
Again, I think it starts with expectation setting up front. The best coaches I ever had, again, being an athlete, like I remember high school soccer training, it was 5:30 in the morning on the track. It was 2 minutes under 12 minutes go. Early in the season when you didn't have your fitness, you were pulling over and maybe throwing up on the side of the track until over time you built immunity from that and you got back in full fitness. And you might have hated it at the time, but come the 10th, 15th game of the season or the 80th minute of the game, that's where we won, is because we put in all of that hard work. And that was kind of the expectation that was set. This was not going to be a cakewalk to be on this team, that we had high standards and high expectations. But man, we were going to have fun and we were going to celebrate. And like, you were going to get clear instructions if something wasn't going right. And I care deeply for you. You felt all of those things being part of that team. And we did incredibly. And like, as the real life or the sports world then playing out in the business world are things I'd tried to take from those experiences and bring them to my leadership style. It's the same. It's, when you're coming in here, and let's use Rippling as the example, we are trying to build a generational company. We are trying to build something that becomes the de facto standard in HR and payroll, that becomes the name that is, say, the Salesforce of our world, that becomes one of the most successful companies to do it in terms of hitting milestones along the way, whether that's revenue milestones, customer milestones. It's the big leagues. Like, we have very high expectations. We have very ambitious leaders across the business globally. If you want to come here, there's going to be incredible opportunity to learn. God, there's 30 different products that we sell. We're going into all these international markets. The speed is frenetic, is crazy. I'm going to be here to support you. I'm giving you, perhaps the platform to come in and build a career here. Like, we've gone from 0 to almost 90 staff. It ain't going to slow down. That means more opportunities are going to come up every day. There's new people coming in and there's new things we're learning, new products we're launching, but we're going to work hard and we're going to achieve and succeed. And I expect your behavior to be of the same level as a professional athlete, you to take it very seriously, hone your craft, take feedback on board, and we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. I'm going to support and love you in the background along the way, but I'm also going to give you the tough love stuff that helps you grow and get better. And I'm going to hopefully deliver it, constructively. So that, I don't know. That's the kind of world I want to create. Do you want to cruise along and just kind of hide in the background? The analogy I use with candidates a lot is like, there are people who just love walking their dog And that's their like form of exercise. There's others who are training. They're up at 4:30 in the morning on a bike, 50 miles around the northern beaches of Sydney. And then they're back and they're going to do a workout in the afternoon. They're training for an Ironman. Like that is more us. Like we are that kind of intense around business as that type of person would be on their health and fitness and training for like the ultimate thing that you can do, the ultimate physical challenge.
It's really interesting that you kind of mentioned that, because when you spoke about leaving Salesforce for LinkedIn, you mentioned that, things were starting to get a little bit too comfortable for you and you were sort of looking for that next challenge. And I think that one of the things that's sort of often overlooked, especially with success, is that, there's often a ton of different opportunities and different pathways which can get pretty difficult to navigate and decide what the right path is. Obviously from what I heard in the research calls, but also speaking to you, I think you're a very sort of considered person with the decisions that you make. What is it that you looked for through the due diligence process or assessing these particular companies that made you decide that LinkedIn, Slack, and then Rippling were the right opportunities at that right time for you?
Yeah. Like LinkedIn was one that all happened very fast. I can't say that I was deeply researched on them because, in fact, I didn't know they were starting the Sales Navigator product line. It was that early in its infancy. I just happened to get a note from someone I was connected to. Again, kind of the power of network and, cultivating that, paying it forward and supporting the people that have come into your lives professionally, personally, whatever it might be. You never know what goodness might come my way. And I happened to get that in mail, which was the reason why I ended up joining LinkedIn. And I was obviously wildly passionate about what they did and what social selling, modern selling, leveraging social networks would be. And so with Slack, that was a move that I knew was coming. In fact, I had resigned 9 months in advance to my leader at LinkedIn, or let her know that by the end of the financial year I was going to be leaving. I would help find my replacement, stay on as long as needed. But, we were as a family moving back to Australia at the end of that year. So I had plenty of time and runway to go investigate. And so again, for me, it's a couple things. One is ideally you're getting behind a product that is a market leader. If you're in a category and there's 10 players, you're not choosing the 8th. It's one of the top few because they've built a better mousetrap, have stronger leadership, have a bigger, more ambitious vision, whatever it might be. But that's definitely plays into my mind. Second, I have to be passionate about it. Again, I was with LinkedIn, what they were trying to do to change the way people sold. And I very much was so with Slack, getting people off email and just having a more productive way that work get done. Third is the leader. Like, who am I going to be working for directly? And then who are my peers, counterparts that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with? That is often at senior levels, the cohort who you're hopefully going to learn from. And it's tough when you're overseas. A lot of my counterparts are heads of Europe and heads of Japan, and I don't get much FaceTime, particularly in the last few years or post-COVID or during COVID. Didn't get to spend a lot of time in person with people. And so what do I believe I'm going to learn, get out of, and how am I going to grow in this experience? That's a huge piece of it as well. Compensation, part of the picture, but more so equity. And, I think it's interesting. I don't see a lot of Australians candidates that are coming through to me or others really leaning into this. It's going to end up being the majority of my wealth over time is understanding the equity dynamics of the companies that I'm joining and wanting to be part of that and wanting to have a stake in it and the potential financial impact that it can have down the road. So I'm very thoughtful around that and very researched in what those opportunities are, whether they're private equity backed, whether they're pre-IPO, whether there's some other kind of potential liquidity event that plays into it. And I got to believe in it. Like, it can't be a subject or a topic that just doesn't really rev my engine. There's, a bunch of things that have come my way and like seemingly good back technologies, leader in their category, but it just doesn't get me up in the morning and excited. Was interested. I've been through 2 major acquisitions. So both $27 billion. LinkedIn bought by Microsoft, which was honestly like a masterclass. Like LinkedIn was largely left alone. Microsoft very quickly kind of leaned into wanting to have Sales Navigator and Microsoft Dynamics, their CRM product, integrated. And so it was like the first place they were looking for an ROI. And I was at the center of that, like running US enterprise, Satya involved on like 5 or 10 of our deals, massive catalyst for us to win some of our biggest deals ever. And that came from that bond between us. And, I thought the same thing would happen. I think the first day that we were welcomed back into the office, I think they had like the picture of me in my Bondi apartment when I started Salesforce. And I thought, God, if I can just leverage some of that same magic pixie dust and sprinkle it on this new relationship, then we can have the same success. But, different times and different companies. And it wasn't really a place where Slack was left to its own. And we did not continue to grow it in the way that we had expected to, in the way that I thought we were when I signed up for it. It very much was being looked at, integrated very, very quickly into the Salesforce machine. And, for me, it just wasn't what I wanted in my career. And so, again, the benefit of working for some of these great companies and with great leaders is that, hopefully you stay in contact with them. And again, I always try to cultivate my network, stay in touch with some of the people that have inspired me, that I've learned from, that I've worked with, customers or partners as well. And I had to reach out. I had to reach out right before Christmas with someone who works at Rippling, who said, we're about to launch our Australian payroll. We'd love to pick your brain on go to market and learn about that before we set up shop. And I did that and kind of started my due diligence process as I do, a little bit about who are the leaders, Parker and Matt and others. What's the TAM? What's the company kind of aspiring to do and to be? Talked to my couple of friends that had worked for a year or two at the business and just fell in love with it. It's just this organization which, the parallels to Salesforce are just uncanny. Walking into a market with kind of a number of traditional incumbents who we haven't seen a lot of innovation from. I think us bringing a disruptive model and just doing everything all in one, being able to pay global employees, having domestic payroll in various countries. This has just not all been brought into one place and one platform. It's a wildly ambitious vision, but this whole concept of compound company, which is at the heart of what we're building, the benefits of being a compound company, having all of these systems together, removing the friction or burden of having to integrate all these things, getting the benefits of workflow, of one common AI platform, whatever it might be, getting all the commercial benefits from a pricing, packaging, bundling perspective, building software this way instead of narrowly for a niche focus is just something I buy into wholeheartedly. Coming from Slack, who was the narrow niche leader, who was going up against the compound company Microsoft, and the power of just that business model and what we encountered, particularly during COVID, where they went the route of giving it away for free. They had it all pre-integrated, or so they said, to all of their other technology stack. I lived it for multiple years, and the strength of that kind of being at the forefront of what Rippling was all about was very appealing. And so that's what was really a driver for me making the plunge. And it ticked all those other boxes that I mentioned earlier that you're looking for in terms of the leaders that you're working with, the addressable market, just the opportunity and the ambition that's behind the company and its key executives. That was all there.
Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. On that equity piece, I think that's definitely something that I've seen sort of play out a lot over here as well. For anyone that is maybe going through that process at the moment and having those sort of conversations, are there particular things that they should be looking out for or things that they should be mindful of through those discussions?
Well, I think if you understand the vision of where the company wants to go and what their ambition is, you understand where they are now, and then you understand what equity might be put in front of you and what that might mean, you can kind of do the math. There's a bit of risk, but particularly younger in your career, maybe it's a risk worth taking. I think you can go and, based on who's backed it and how much they've raised, all of those things are kind of contributors to, likelihood of success. Never works out perfectly, but if a company is raising $500 million or $1 billion, it's probably more likely to succeed than, one that's just getting its first million in seed capital. But I think for equity, you got to do the sanity checks on all the things I just mentioned. It's like, who are the leaders? Like, is this a second time founder? Is this a group of executives, product and on the business side, that I believe can lead us through the promised land of what they're talking about? Or is it a lot of people that have never done this? They're making it up as they go. What's the TAM and what's the market opportunity? Is it in a space that I believe in and the market is clearly moving in that direction? Yeah, there's a lot of ways to, I think, check on it and determine how risky is kind of the equity upside piece. And is it worth it to me?
As you mentioned earlier, a lot of the companies you've worked for previously, so Salesforce, LinkedIn, Slack, are recognized brands and household names now, but that wasn't necessarily the case when you joined those companies initially. Something Andrew mentioned is your ability to find really talented people, and he sort of described it as your own version of the PayPal mafia, Matt Loop's mafia. What, again, and some of those sort of things can be obvious in hindsight of course this person was going to be successful in their career and all of those sort of things, and it's much harder to identify those people that just need that right type of opportunity around those sort of things. What is it through the hiring process or characteristics through those sort of early discussions with someone that you look for, and how do you assess for that through the interview process?
There's a lot of things. I think over time, my spidey sense has gotten stronger. You definitely don't want to wing it. And I think, like anything, when you've done it for so long, you become particularly attuned to the things that work and some of the characteristics. It's been different, modestly different at every company, the things that you're looking for. But I think a couple of things that hold true, like number one is passion for learning. It's very clear that this person is there for growth, has demonstrated this passion for growth, whether it's like their university background and everything that they've done, their extracurriculars, just how they seize life and their travel, all these things that just kind of demonstrate an insatiable thirst to learn, grow, take on new challenges, be resilient to all of these things around them. And I think that is more important now than ever. Like, the world is way faster and crazier than it was 20 years ago. So you have to double down on that attribute, I'd say. Second is a good human. What is that? I can't just put it in a box and tell you what that is, but it. It's what have they done in their life? What are the hardships they've overcome? What is their journey? When you hear their story, and it could be that they dealt with tragedy, they overcame all this adversity coming up, they do all of these things with their life, they have very strong personal values that come up in their behaviors, their actions, and you can hear it in their tone in their conversation when you're interviewing them. But great humans, if I can I'll stop it on those two. Again, there's probably a long list of other additional attributes, but if you get great people that are thirsty to grow and learn, that's 90% of the battle. That is what, without question, has been my secret sauce personally, is I've found great people. I put them together, hopefully give them a bit of a vision as to where we're going, what we're doing, and then create the environment where they can go do their best work. Have it be upbeat. Have it be a fun place to work. but also have it be demanding. Like, we have high expectations. We're not here to just sit on our hands. And that's okay. People like hard work. People like challenge, particularly the types of people I think that I've been able to find. They want to step up. They want to be stretched. They want to learn and grow. And if I do that, and then I spend the other 10% of my time removing obstacles getting in their way, supporting them as best I can, then 20 years on, a lot of good things have happened.
Yeah. Something James mentioned was, he said your superpower was being the ultimate networker, and the sort of emphasis that you put on sort of like, or the importance that you place on personal branding specifically. What role does that play in the hiring process for you, and how sort of intentional are you with some of those things?
Look, personal branding, I'm far from expert. There are a number of colleagues who I've worked with who are masters of this, who are super thought out around it. If you go and look at my LinkedIn, I do not have like I don't have like a 3-day cadence where I'm dropping knowledge bombs or truths in order to like build that. Probably to my detriment. I don't know. Maybe it's something I can do better. Look, I just believe relationships are the most important thing that we have in life. Certainly is the case in my personal life, with my family, with my friends. They've always been what fuels me, what gives me energy, and it carries over into the business world. I have received so much goodness from close friends and the people who have mentored me along the way that I try to invest as much as I can into those people. And I think it's been a winning formula. Andrew's a great example of that, in someone who had an incredible attitude, incredible work ethic, had tremendous success, and someone who I stay very close to and try to support as best I can. I don't know if it's like you're proud of, I've got 2 kids, an 11-year-old and an almost 9-year-old. You're like proud of so many things that they do, and it gives you this sense of your own personal selfish accomplishment almost. I feel the same with my team. I want them to succeed here, or even if they go elsewhere, I just want them to succeed and be happy. And I don't know, I feel like there's no specific science or method or playbook I can really give to do that, other than I know if I show up in the right way, treat people the right way, bring on the right people who all kind of coalesce and work together in the right way, then the business results flow from that. I think the culture kind of speaks for itself, aligned to kind of a set of core values that we believe in. And that's what's worked for me. So I'm sticking with it.
Well, something, I can't remember if it was James or Andrew, one of the things that they mentioned was that you're very intentional with team meetings and kind of starting them off with personal wins. And, obviously, even just seeing the way you kind of speak about your family and the way that you sort of light up around that, you can tell that those things are really important for you. Is there anything else that you kind of do to sort of help cultivate that personal touch, or that kind of like those personal elements into the way that you sort of think about team or culture, or the way that you sort of build that out?
I think I need to get better at it again. I think it's been everything from, we set up a Slack channel that was all around acknowledgments and making sure that, it takes the littlest of things. There's so many people within a business who often don't get limelight, celebrated, acknowledged. And just setting up a Slack channel where we did that, and we were just very conscious about, let's make sure that the solution engineer or the product person or the support rep that doesn't get, put on a pedestal at kickoff or on the quarterly business review, like, gets acknowledged. And there's incredible work that's happening all the time around us. In fact, we just had our all hands like a week ago for a May. And I think I caught myself and recognized that we were being too sales centric. And, I wanted and made a conscious effort to go and bring in and celebrate all of the successes of the broader business. And like, we did that, and, immediately a number of messages came right when the meeting finished saying, that was awesome. It was great to see this team and this person and this, whoever recognized up on the slide, you calling out their name. And so that's the new format for our all hands, is just it's so easy. It's such a small thing to stop and acknowledge and say thank you, to stop and say hello in the hallway. I tried to do, I think I got 2 or 3 of the SDRs, we're going to go to coffee next week and just talk shop, trying to spend time with every individual in the business to know who they are personally, to answer their questions, and to have it so that even if I'm the senior leader and they're 20 years my junior, that I'm approachable, that they can come up to me and ask me any question that's on their mind, that there's a high degree or level of comfort, and I've created an environment where people feel that way. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. And I guess like something that you just mentioned as part of that was you caught yourself in being too sort of sales centric with that. And I think that kind of like when you're in the thick of things and kind of on the treadmill of sort of running the business, it can be very hard to take that step back and have that sort of wider approach of, wait a second, are we doing things in the right way, or are we getting off kilter? Is there anything that you use or anything that kind of helps give you that sort of perspective to be able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture versus being so focused on the day-to-day with it?
Well, like an interesting thing with Rippling that's different than the other 3 companies, I would say at LinkedIn, Slack, and Salesforce, I spent probably 1/10 the time across those 20 years that I have in 2 years at Rippling with the product team. I happen to be in a world where what we offer is hyper localized. Payroll is hyper localized. HR and employment law is wildly different in every country that we support. And so with that, the need to have our offering tailored to the Australian or Singaporean or New Zealand market requires like a very deep partnership. It requires very close connection to customers and our implementation or customer success team, to our AE team, yes, who's hearing the feedback on when we're selling, to our support organization on the cases that are coming up and where we might need to make product enhancements. It's been incredible. The business is kind of requiring me, and I'm loving it, to be wildly multidimensional in a way that I hadn't necessarily done before. It is effectively like a CEO role, and I try to envision it or run it as if we're a headquartered Australian company, and all of the resourcing and requirements that we would have in that case, that we bring those to bear. So that's been great. And I think that's also unique, and I think has been picked up by some of our other regions, and we're starting to like run and organize the business a little bit more that way, just based off of what I've done. So that's what I've in terms of stepping back from sales. Was that the question?
Yeah, in terms of just having that, being able to take that step back and sort of realize that you're not on the right path with it, or that you need to sort of course correct slightly, of just being coming to that realization that you were kind of focusing too much on the sales side of things, versus I guess it can be very easy to be on the treadmill of it and just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah.
I mean, it was like an issue that came up with one of the teams that prompted me to go out and support it. And it just made me very much realize that the entire organization needs to be working. If there's any breaks anywhere along the way, the whole thing loses efficiency, can lose culture, it can lose everything. Marketing might be going great. Our SDR team might be doing an incredible job of top of funnel. Salespeople might be executing and over delivering on numbers. Solution consultants painting incredible technical visions, goes to implementation, and they, perfectly deploy and build the customer vision that they bought from the sellers. Yet it goes to support, and it's 5-day response times, it's incorrect answers, and the whole house of cards falls down. So that again is me being super intentional now with the Rippling business of how I can invest my time in all of these areas, ensuring that there's success across the board, and bring everyone along the way on that journey too. I think all of our leaders, not everyone reports directly to me across all of our functions, yet I bring us together as a leadership team. I think all of us recognize that is very much the truth, that the lack of success, or if someone is unsupported, a leader or a function, that it puts everyone else's business at risk. And so I think we're somewhat early days in operating this way, but it's off to a really good start of just everyone being conscious, thoughtful of the different teams and supportive any way they can. And so that means feedback is more rampant to me and to the teams, because that is, instead of stepping back and kind of taking notice of what's happening and maybe recognizing something not going well, I think a better way is to get feedback, to have, an environment where someone's going to proactively come to you and say, this isn't working and I want help. And can we work this through together? Yeah.
Something that Andrew mentioned was, I believe it's a LinkedIn principle or just like a philosophy that they have about make big things happen, get shit done, and have fun. And
the Venn diagram.
The Venn diagram. And, I think speaking to Katrina about this, she mentioned that, you and her have a lot of conversations around sort of balance around these sort of things. You and I were having a conversation prior to turning on the microphones about the Como Club. And, I think that there's just often this way of looking at things where to be successful, you need to hustle all the time and give up everything else in life, or you need to focus just on your well-being, and ambition and hard work is a dirty word, where I think for a lot of us, a lot of what we sort of do for work is such an important part of leading a fulfilling life and gives a lot of meaning and purpose behind what we do. But that doesn't necessarily need to kind of come at a cost of other important parts of life. And something that kind of came up through every conversation that I had for this interview was how important your family is for you, and the critical role that kind of plays, and how intentional you are about that. At the same time, the role that you kind of said, you're not just looking to, the culture that you've built at Rippling isn't just to like settle for walking the dog. This is, you guys are training for the triathlon.
Yep.
How do you, everyone's got a different version of this, but I think it's helpful for people to kind of like understand what does that look like in different people's perspective of finding that balance. How do you sort of think about the way that you use your time, how you sort of set things up, the way that you approach this in trying to be very present with your work, but also at the same time being very present for your family as well?
Yeah, it's an ongoing exercise, and I've got a partner at home who's not shy to give me feedback, which is great. And it's been different. It's different at different stages of the business. When we were in San Francisco, I left the LinkedIn office at 5:22 every day. I knew it by the minute, because it was a 20-ish minute walk, 20 to 22. My ferry left at 5:45, and I would get back into my house at 6:17 to 6:20 every day, like clockwork. And I was done. This was an environment where there was no Slack. It was, email and what have you. And this is pre-COVID. But I would not take my work home. It was done. And I was with the kids. I was reading to my daughter every night before bed. I was with my wife, and it was work again the next morning. COVID didn't help. Then it was you're home all the time and you're working, and those two things are bleeding over each other. And now it's my home office is 6 inches away from our family room. So if I'm there, am I sitting in my office chair, yet I'm talking to my family? Have I really disconnected? Look, it's an ongoing exercise and activity. And it's about being better at putting phones down, putting them away, not having them on the table. It is the time when you work. It's about, in a given day when I'm awake, I can do whatever the number is, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. But I got to go pick up my daughter at 3:30 and get her to dance at 4:30. That's normally in the business hours of the day. I don't know. Historically, I might say no, 8 to 5 is sacred, but not the case now, because I can come home and I can eat dinner with the family, put the kids to bed, and maybe negotiate with my wife that I got to do an hour more of work once they're down. And so hasn't been perfected. The world keeps changing. How we work, where we work, the technology we use to work keeps changing. Maybe AI will help me get even better, more productive, not have to work as much, and takes half the time to do a task, which means more time for the family. But I think high octane athletes are the same thing. If they're waking up at 5 a.m. to go on a 20-mile bike ride and they miss breakfast with the kids, it's because they're trying to accomplish something. And then how can they, make it up in some other way? Maybe they have to sacrifice mornings, but they're super present at dinner when they come home at the end of the day. I don't know. There's trade-offs along the way, but definitely need to be there for the big moments. And reduction in travel has been helpful. Like I was at Salesforce, again, pre-COVID, I was 6 to 8 times a year in the US. Like the way we exchange information was by getting on the plane. QBRs, Dreamforce, all the major events. And then you'd come back and try to, for a month or two, run with whatever you learned at the offsite, implement it, and then you go back for the next download. And you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. I love your point about trade-offs. I think the key part is probably being intentional about that. So I think we make trade-offs whether we realize that we're making them or not. It's just more, like you said, being conscious. So if you are going to wake up at 5 a.m. because you need to train, like you said, you have to understand that you probably need to make that up somewhere. Where I think a lot of the times where we get into trouble is we don't realize that we're kind of making a lot of these trade-offs and just let a lot of other things slide.
I mean, I have no choice, really. I have to wake up at 5 to go and get exercise in. There's just not other time in the day that will work for me because I have to do the work stuff and be present, particularly on my in-office days. I have to drop the kids off in the morning at school at a particular time. And then I want to be back with the family and laughing and having fun at dinner time. So there's no time. I gotta keep exercising and figuring out a way to look after my own mental and physical well-being.
Are those the 3 main sort of pillars for you in terms of exercise, drop-offs, and being home for dinner?
The 3 pillars. You could throw more. Golf is a pillar in there, which is like the ultimate mental and my sport of choice in my old age now. I would say, and it comes and goes in waves. Eating healthy, which I get a lot of support from my wife on. She's a nutritionist and wonderful cook. I'm an average sous chef, wonderful dish cleaner. It is, mental wellness. I think I've lucked out. Having a supportive partner is a massive assistance on that front. But certainly in times when I feel stressed, burnt out, I'm pretty good at stepping away and kind of going to an outlet, one of my outlets, to just decompress and de-stress. And then, yes, it's the kid time. I mean, mornings are chaotic, but it's their sporting events and their dance recitals. Those are the things that are very important for me to be there. Amazing.
Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I've got a Twitter or an X account. I'm not very active on it. Or you can shoot me an email, mloop@rippling.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes. Matt, once again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to episode 212 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this episode will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.